Okay, so we're back at Camp Floody. Well, kind of, but not really. We're back at Camp Floody in spirit, that is. We're going to start off with our new DIY tiny house video series, where I'm going to attempt to explain what steps I took in each phase of my build. I'm going to try to lay out some detailed framing concepts. I'm going to try to demonstrate how to properly lay out a wall, how we build our walls, what we do to make those walls solid and strong, and what material choices we can make in order to make our tiny house as structural as we would like it to be. There's little nuances when we frame that will create more structure than what you typically think. The way we overlap our material, the way we nail our studs, the things that we do on an everyday basis in order to make our buildings structurally sound. I'm going to try to explain some of those material selections in detail. I'm going to kind of give you a simple walkthrough on my simple plumbing system and maybe do some demonstrations on how we do that plumbing and how we crimp our pecs and do all that stuff, and how we determine how we're going to make our airflow and our water flow to the right directions. And then finally, we're going to just kind of take you through the remaining phases of my tiny house build. We're getting ready to start our finished materials, and it'll be kind of interesting to kind of take those steps at one step at a time and see how I came to my determinations. In this video, I'm going to explain in detail what I looked for in the trailer I chose, how I tracked that trailer down, what things I did to ensure that the trailer would be sound for the tiny house that I was building, how I looked at the tires, the axles, the trailer height, the tongue, the structure of the tongue, and those things we're going to just kind of take a walk through in each of the following videos. So thanks for watching. Okay, so our first arrow is pointing at the tires, and more specifically the axles. So the two things that I initially looked for was the quality of the tires. Now, I found this trailer for free on Craigslist, which was very, very fortunate. And when I got there, the first thing I looked at was the tires, and the tires were brand new. They were not weather checked. There was no wear on the treads. They had just put them on and they were covered up. These are two very important facts for me being able to tow that trailer down the road. The second was the axles. Now, on the tongue of the trailer, the axle weight was listed. So I knew that I had two 6,000 pound axles, so I had 12,000 pounds worth of weight that I could haul on this particular travel trailer with the axle setup that was underneath it. The third, and more importantly to me, was the fact that the floor of the trailer was just above the axles. Why this was important is because it allowed me to have more living space above the trailer. That allowed me to be able to expand higher with my tiny house and gain height inside. So height, weight, condition, and capacity. Those were the 4 things that I looked for on that trailer. These were very, very important to make sure that I could make the trailer go down the road smoothly, cleanly, and get to where I had to go safely. So those were the key factors that I looked for in the trailer. So the next arrow here is showing the refrigerator vent, and the point to that arrow is the fact that we have to look at the components that go into venting the refrigerator, and maybe those are something that we can apply to our tiny house build. It's important to look at everything as a potential to move on to the next build. This arrow is showing the patio door, and this patio door wasn't in particularly good shape, but I did intend to reuse it at the original, but it was just in such disrepair that I just felt that there was no way we could transfer it in. But the point is that in the future, it is something that could maybe be moved into a tiny house build. This is the air conditioner, and in our purpose, we couldn't reuse the rooftop air conditioner, but it was in good enough shape that we were able to put it on Craigslist and get $50 for it. It was a good deal for somebody. It didn't go into landfill, and it got reused. The next arrow shows the exact same thing. That little light that was on there is something that we are going to be using in the tiny house. It was something that we rescued off of the travel trailer. And the point is that it is just something that we were able to repurpose. When we look at the entire tiny house build, as we move from a trailer to the tiny house, the point is that everything has potential to move on to the next build. No matter what it is, it has that potential, and we can never lose sight on that when we pick our travel trailer. So as we move on to the other side of the trailer, we're looking at the utility side and the tongue side. And the most important takeaways when we evaluate this side is what we're going to be able to do with the items that we see and the items each area represents. As we look at the trailer, the first arrow is showing us the tongue, and the tongue is very important because we want to make sure we have a functional tongue, a solid tongue, no rust around it, been well maintained, the clasp works properly, and we got to make sure we have the right size ball to fit that trailer. So when we look at the tongue, it's important that we note that it's solid, that it's the right size, and that it functions properly. If it doesn't do one of those three, you don't know if you really have a trailer that you can salvage and take into a tiny house. And those are very, very important to note. Next, we're pointing out at the utility outlet, and what that represents is the water heater that's under the sink. Now, that's important because that water heater can be salvaged and taken into a tiny house if we choose to do a more traditional system, which I did not. The next arrow is showing the vent for the bathroom. And it's important to note that that vent cover and that fill cap that's right there that the arrow is pointing at were both valuable in recovering for our tiny house. We did use the fill cap and the vent cover as they were repurposed, even though we did not use the items on the bathroom. The propane tanks are one thing, but it's important to note that the most important thing to take away off of the tongue of this trailer is that regulator valve, because it does control dual tanks. It gives us a spot to start at the front of our tiny house, and it gives us the ability to establish where we're going to start our gas lines from and run them to. So those are very, very important to note in our tiny house. The propane tanks are very, very nice takeaway. If you're able to get ones that are current and modern and they can be salvaged and reused, great. If not, dispose of them properly and put them in a place that can reuse them and repurpose them and maybe get them up to code. So it's important just to take a look at that. So let's move on to the inside of the trailer. And the inside of the trailer is a very, very important part of our tiny house build as we relate our travel trailer to our tiny house. There were many, many things inside of the travel trailer that are actively working and functioning in the tiny house. The first of which would have been the stove. This stove, however, I could not get working properly, so we had to dispose of it to scrap metal. The point is that if you can find a travel trailer with a stove and oven working, great, natural transition. The second is behind those doors. All of the mechanicals that are in there, water heater, water tank, water pump, everything that's in there can be reused and recycled into your tiny house build. The fact is there's many things underneath that sink that could be reused. This arrow is pointing to the bed, and under that bed we had an electrical service and a water tank, both of which are being currently used in my tiny house build. Very, very important to note that there's all kinds of things that we can rescue out of there. The sink and the faucet are still going to be rescued, and we're going to use them in a different tiny house build, but the point is that there was a good sink and a good faucet, and they were both able to move into the tiny house build or repurpose to another build. And lastly, we're looking at the refrigerator. In this particular tiny house build, the refrigerator was no good, so we had to recycle it. The fact of the matter is that it would have been nice to be able to have salvaged the fridge out of there. for watching our DIY tiny house video 1 in our series of hopefully instructional videos that people can refer to if they have any questions. I hope they help. These are just some of the observations that I made when I looked for my trailer and picked the one I chose to build this, my first tiny house project, on. Some of the things I hope are pretty obvious. Some of the things maybe not so much obvious. Things that we don't really think about. You know, we have to consider all the space that's in our tiny house, and if we have a floor that's above the wheels, it makes it much harder to get the space that we're looking for out of the tiny house, to lose that height. So those are just some of the things that, you know, as people incorporate and start on their tiny house build, these are some things that hopefully they will think about, and maybe this will just jog some other thoughts. So